In this video, I'm going to argue for the moral value of non-human animals. The position I'm defending is that animals are ends in themselves. Like persons, they are beings worthy of respect. They are not mere means. Ultimately, my position stems from Kantian ethics with some revisions. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Isn't Immanuel Kant that dogmatic woo peddler who's basically Deepak Chopra? Well, if you get your ethics lessons from shoddy forum posts, then yes, that's him. But I like to think that actual Kantian ethics is on firmer ground than crystal healing. Anyway, one of the changes that I think strengthens Kantian ethics can be found in D.D. Raphael's book, Moral Philosophy. Quote, Kant's formulation is confined to the treatment of human beings and says nothing about the treatment of other animals. This is mainly because Kant emphasized the place of rationality in ethics. To regard someone as an end is to respect A, his desires, B, his power of decision. The second of these applies only to rational beings. And so, if we assume that non-human animals do not have enough rational capacity to make decisions, it is not possible to regard an animal fully as an end. Kant may also have been influenced by the fact that most people do not think it immoral to use animals merely as means when they are killed for food. Since Kant's formulations of the categorical imperative are intended to bring to light the principles which underlie normal moral consciousness, it seems to follow that the principle of treating other beings as ends and not merely as means does not extend to the treatment of non-human animals. Nevertheless, as an account of normal moral consciousness, Kant's presentation must be defective, since we do think it morally wrong to cause pain to animals unless as a necessary evil for the sake of a more important moral end. And quite a lot of people have doubts about the ethics of killing animals for food, even if they do not act on their doubts. So I think that Kant's second principle, the one which gives the content to the categorical imperative, should be extended to read, act so as to treat rational and or sensitive beings as ends and not merely as means. This will imply having a regard for the desires of animals, and so not causing them pain unless for a more important moral end. End quote. In supporting my position, I will be relying on the argument from marginal cases, for this video anyway. In addition, I will be critiquing the welfarist and consequentialist approach to the argument from marginal cases and, in general, animal ethics. Respectfully, I have to disagree with my welfarist/consequentialist, vegetarian, and vegan friends.
The gloves are off.
What follows are essentially formulations of the argument from marginal cases by Regan. When arguing for the moral value that demarcates humans from animals, any non-arbitrary criteria for human value will not extend to all non-paradigmatic humans. For example, infants, the severely cognitively impaired, and hermits. Whether it's a certain level of intelligence, the ability to reciprocate, or standing in a social contract, some humans will fail, while some non-humans will succeed, to meet the given criteria. If these non-paradigmatic or marginal humans do have value, then any criterion that excludes them from the moral community fails and ought to be rejected. If humans, regardless of cognitive capacity, ability to reciprocate, standing in a social contract, etc., have inherent value, which is to say, at the very least, that they have value regardless of their instrumental value to other beings, then the property or properties sufficient for this value can be found in many animals. Intuitively, we do not permit lethal medical experimentation against the will of non-paradigmatic humans, even if we would benefit from such testing. In explaining this intuition, Regan posits, as do I, that these humans have inherent value, and as beings with inherent value, they have basic rights. There are hard limits to how they can be treated. Given that they have basic rights, they can be treated in ways that grossly violate the respect moral agents owe to them. This goes toward explaining our intuition against murdering the mentally impaired or using them as mere means to our ends. But what is the property shared by both autonomous and non-autonomous humans that is morally relevant to their status as beings with inherent value, as beings who are right holders? Why is it impermissible to forcefully subject either one to lethal medical testing simply for our benefit? Because they are human? Claiming humans have inherent value because they are humans says as little as claiming rocks have inherent value because they are rocks. The question is, what is it about humans that makes them beings of inherent value? On inherent value, Regan has this to say, quote, "It remains to be asked what underlies the possession of inherent value. Some are tempted by the idea that life itself is inherently valuable. This view would authorize attributing inherent value to chimpanzees, for example, and so might find favor with some people who oppose using these animals as means to our ends. But this would also authorize attributing inherent value to anything and everything that is alive, including, for example, crabgrass, lice, bacteria, and cancer cells. It is exceedingly unclear, to put the point as mildly as possible, either that we can have a duty to treat these things with respect, or that any clear sense can be given to the idea that we do. More plausible by far is the view that those individuals who have inherent value are the subjects of a life, are, that is, the experiencing subjects of a life that fares well or ill for them over time. Those who have an individual experiencing welfare, logically independent of their utility relative to the interests or welfare of others. Competent humans are subjects of a life in this sense, but so too are those incompetent humans who have concerned us. Indeed, so too are many other animals. Cats and dogs, hogs and sheep, dolphins and wolves, horses and cattle, and most obviously, chimpanzees and the other non-human great apes." End quote. It's difficult to argue that we do not have, at bare minimum, an obligation not to inflict gratuitous suffering on either autonomous humans or non-autonomous humans. It does not matter if rationality is accompanied in the latter's pain. It does not matter if Ted Bundy or Ted Cruz derive great pleasure from torturing a dying, mentally enfeebled hermit. Inflicting gratuitous suffering on individuals is wrong because they have a right not to be treated cruelly. Inflicting pain on others for our ends is to treat them as a mere mean. Of course, most animals, as subjects of a life, have similar morally relevant characteristics, such as their ability to experience pain and their possession of interests that they would rather fulfill than frustrate. In treating similar cases alike, we ought to extend equal consideration to the interests of other subjects of a life, those subjects being non-human animals. If we take the argument for marginal cases to be sound, but we reject the inherent value of animals and non-paradigmatic humans, as consequentialists do, then we will be pushed in the direction of changing our views of the moral status of both humans and non-human animals. For example, Singer is infamous for intertwining the argument for marginal cases with his replaceability argument, which holds that it would be permissible to painlessly kill and replace any animals or marginal humans who are not self-aware and do not possess awareness of their past or future. These humans, much like animals, can be used for lethal medical experiments, or if we develop a taste for them, to be slaughtered for their flesh. If Singer and company are correct, then the interests of non-human animals should be taken more seriously than what the status quo now enforces. After all, we would have a direct duty to an animal to take its pleasure or preferences into consideration. But we are still permitted to exploit them if we sufficiently benefit. The uses range from, but are not limited to, food, medical experimentation, and amusement. As for humans, in treating like cases alike, we would have to vastly rethink our treatment of non-paradigmatic cases, and to be consistent, we should consider treating them as we would non-human animals. This entails that we could use these humans for food, medical experimentation, amusement, slave labor, etc. Not only can non-paradigmatic humans be used for these reasons, but so can any human if ultimately the benefit gained outweighed the harm caused. When it comes to exploiting animals, Singer's welfarism, like the status quo, permits it. But if the argument for marginal cases is sound, welfarism has the additional, unwanted conclusion of lowering the moral status of many humans. On the other hand, if the argument for marginal cases is sound, and non-paradigmatic humans are beings of inherent value, then it follows that animals are beings of inherent value. The rights-based view is what I take to be the strongest view. It does not require us to radically change our views concerning humans, whether they're cognitively impaired or not. It offers a defense of the rights of both autonomous and non-autonomous humans. And the most radical conclusion it draws, which I'm not convinced is actually that radical, is one that is followed by the logical extension of inherent value from one particular species of animal to others. As for attacking this extension, I have yet to see a convincing argument that draws a definitive ethical line between all humans and all non-human animals. What I'm proposing gives a defense of the rights that non-paradigmatic humans possess, and the rights that animals possess by extension, rather than counterintuitive reasons as to why we should experiment and eat humans, and, once again by extension, non-human animals. Of course, welfarists such as Singer can give reasons as to why we should reject the inherent value of others, but this is easier said than done. Given the severe inadequacies found in the opposition to animal rights, I think it is clear why both welfarism and the status quo should be challenged and rejected.